Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for stopping by, gathering around the kitchen table here at the parsonage. It's time again for Bible study as we are working our way through the book of Acts. And we are up to chapter 21, if you're following along. Verse 37 through 40 is where we're going to read now this afternoon. And we'll see how far along we get here. You recall that the Apostle Paul has made his way now back to Jerusalem, and in order to try and appease the Jews that were out to get him, the leaders of the church had told him to go into the temple area and go through a ritual of cleansing and to help pay for some other individuals who were paying a Nazirite vow, which he did. However, turns out just because the church leaders give you advice doesn't always mean it's good advice. And in this case, it wasn't good advice because people there that are looking for Paul and have it in for him recognize him. And a riot starts and a mob has gathered. And we've all seen the power of mobs these days. And they are in the process of beating him to death. When we get to verse 37 of chapter 21, the Roman garrison, which is in the Castle Antonius, which is right next to the temple area, is actually connected to it by a couple of stairways. And when the uproar goes up, because a garrison is in that particular Roman soldiers is there, they hear, or either that are informed, that there is a disturbance going on. And that's the one thing that Rome will not tolerate, is breaking of the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. If you allow that to happen as a centurion, as a soldier, it can be punishable by death. And so, and also the leadership would also not want to see that, because their place could also be taken away from them as well. So the Roman garrison comes running in. They grab Paul and they pull him out of the situation. And we pick up the reading there. When Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the commander, "May I say something to you?" And the commander said, "Can you speak Greek? Are you not then the Egyptian who some time ago started a revolution and led 4,000 men of the dagger bearers out into the desert?" Paul said, "I am a man who is a Jew, a native of Tarsus, a citizen of no mean city. I ask you, let me speak to the people." And when he had been given his permission to do so, Paul stood on the stairs and made a gesture with his hand to the people. And when a great silence had fallen, he spoke to them in the Hebrew tongue. So this is, they're on the stairway leading out of the temple into the barracks. And apparently the mob is chasing after. They are there gathered at the foot of the steps. Probably the soldiers are guarding the base of the steps, so they can't get any further than that. But it's a struggle. They're fighting their way through the mob. And in the midst of this, Paul makes this outlandish request. Paul still believes the best way to deal with a mob is to look them in the face. And that, by golly, is what he's going to do. And the captain of the guard at that point, whoever he was, whatever rank, is amazed to hear that he's speaking Greek, not only Greek, but accented Greek, good Greek. And so he identifies himself in term, because the centurion thinks that he's this Egyptian who had come along some years before that. In about the year 54 AD, there was an Egyptian who showed up and convinced a group of the dagger men, and I'll tell you who those are in just a second. that they 4,000 of them out onto the Mount of Olives, he convinced them that he can make the walls of the city of Jerusalem fall down, just like Jericho. Well, it didn't happen, and the Romans dealt with them, but the Egyptian in question here got away. And so they're thinking now, oh, this is who this is. He's come to stir up another insurrection, and we got him. And Paul identifies himself and says, by the way, the dagger men are a group that better known as the Essenes, as the Zealots. The Zealots were committed to violence, and they carried daggers concealed in their cloaks. And their philosophy was anytime they could get close to a Roman soldier or a tax collector or someone that was viewed as an enemy of the people, they would stick that dagger in them anytime they got to be able to do it clandestinely. So they were like assassins all over the place. Those were the dagger men. And now Paul says, let me talk to the people here. And he identifies himself as a Jew, as a man that can talk to them in their own language. And so it's interesting too. It says Paul makes a gesture now, standing on the steps, for silence. And the mob does exactly that. Now, was that the Holy Spirit? Was that the force of Paul's personality? Or, we don't know what. But somehow, some way, Paul was able to get their attention. And as, again, we have seen in recent days, getting the attention of the mob is not an easy task to do. They are hell-bent on destruction. Paul was able to get their attention. So, maybe it was just the power of God flowing through Paul at that point. We don't know. But that takes us up now into chapter 22, verse 1. Paul says, we'll read 10 verses here. Men, brethren, and fathers, notice there, brethren. He is putting himself on equal footing with the rest of the crew there, with everybody else there, which definitely got their attention. Might have made some of them extremely angry. How dare he claim to be our equal? But men, brethren, fathers, listen to the defense which I now make to you. And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, they gave him still more quietness. Maybe a lot of them didn't know what this was all about. It was just a mob mentality. So Paul said, I am a Jew. I was born in Tarsus. I was brought up in this city, meaning Jerusalem. I was thoroughly trained at the feet of Gamaliel in the law of our fathers. Gamaliel would have passed away maybe not too many years prior to this. He was a well-known, famous, highly esteemed Pharisee teacher of the law, a rabbi. I was zealous for God, just as you all are today. In fact, I persecuted this way to death, fettering both men and women and delivering them to prison as the high priest and the body of the elders bear me witness. I received letters from them, and I went to the brethren at Damascus to bring those who were there in chains to Jerusalem that they might be punished. And as I was on my way, when I was coming near Damascus about midday, suddenly it happened to me that a great light from heaven shone around me. I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I answered, Who are you, sir? And the voice said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. And those who were with me saw the light, but they did not hear the voice of the person who was speaking to me. I said, What am I to do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, Stand up and go to Damascus, and there you will be told about all the things that have been assigned to you to do. So what he is doing now is he is giving his personal testimony, which is always an interesting and a powerful thing to do, because nothing speaks to other individuals any more clearly than personal experience. This is what happened to me. This is what happened for me. This is how God has worked in my life. That's powerful. It's more powerful than any preaching or anything else. Years ago, one of the most powerful movements in the United Methodist Church, back I believe in the 60s and the 70s, was what was called the lay witness movement. And basically what it was a group of United Methodist laity would gather for a weekend in a particular United Methodist church. And they would hold small group meetings on Saturday, and then they would all come and they would have a service in the evening on Friday night, Saturday night, and then Sunday morning church. And at those group meetings, the coordinator of the weekend would call up individuals to give their testimony as to how God worked in their life. And some of those testimonies you might think were rather mundane, and others were extremely powerful. And people responded to that. More revivals started in United Methodist Church because of the lay witness movement than probably anything else in the last 50 years in the United Methodist Church. I was witness to at least 2 big revivals in Minnesota that took place because of God worked through lay witness weekends. And one was the church that I was serving at that point in time as the assistant for youth and education. And the Sunday morning service, the leader of the weekend, in fact, the leader of the lay witness movement in Minnesota at that time, and this is the middle 70s, was a guy by the name of Maury Schwinn. Maury was a businessman and definitely was a good Christian man. He would always wrap up the service by giving a sermon. Now, that particular, I was maybe three quarters of the way, I would say, through my seminary career. I had taken a lot of my preaching classes and whatnot. I was very much into preaching, learning about preaching. And Maury got up there on Sunday morning, and the church was packed, just full as full could be. And he gave a message that obviously he had not given any forethought to. I learned later, Maury was one of those types that all he did prior to a morning message on Sunday morning was he prayed. He didn't study. He didn't write anything down. He didn't really think about it much. He just believed that he just stood up there and opened his mouth and that he believed God would fill it. I had a professor one time that said, if you believe in that you open your mouth and God will fill it, God will, but it'll be with your foot. And I found out later that that's basically what Maury did. And he got up that morning and he gave the most disjointed, rambling, make no sense kind of message I had ever heard. It was the worst sermon I had ever heard by, no competition, anything, anytime. It was horrible. I was embarrassed. I was disappointed. I was sinking lower and lower in my pew that morning the longer he went on, and he just rambled and rambled and rambled. And I thought, oh man, I had such hopes for this weekend, for this really getting our church really up and going. There are people here that have never been here before, and this, wow. And he got done, and he gave an invitation, and people flocked to the altar. I mean, I have never in my years seen a response to come to the altar and find Christ or to get right with God like that one that day. The altar was filled, totally filled. And a lot of those people got involved in the church. They became A lot of them, it was a confession of faith. They became Christians. They confessed Christ for the first time. Others recommitted their lives, and it was at that point in time that that church really took off. And it was extraordinary. And the sermon was the worst thing I had ever heard in my life. It goes back to the story of Balaam's ass in the Old Testament, where Balaam was the prophet, and God told him not to go and curse Israel, but he was going anyway. And the angel of death was hovering to meet him, and he was riding his donkey, and twice the donkey avoided the angel of death by running off the road or pushing up against the wall. Each time, Balaam, the prophet, beat the tar out of his donkey because the donkey could see the angel of death. Balaam couldn't. The last time, the third time, the donkey just laid down in the road and wouldn't budge, and Balaam was just beating the tar out of the donkey, and God opened the donkey's mouth. And the donkey said, I have been your faithful donkey all of these years. Why are you beating me like this? And Balaam said, if I had a sword, you disobedient brute, I'd kill you right here on the spot. 3 times you have done this to me. And then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of death standing before him with a flaming sword, and he fainted dead on the spot. So the point of the matter is, if God starts using you, you don't pay it any mind, because he could use the dog next door if he was so inclined. You just got to realize that God can take even the most stumbling, poorly chosen words and can use them to his honor and glory. God did that day. It was an incredibly humbling experience for me, because I was sitting there all proud and, I'll confess it, arrogant in my learning, and God used it. And so, and it's all based on personal testimony. And that's what we have going on here, is that Paul is giving his personal testimony. He minces no words. He says, the chief priests, the high priest, all will bear witness to me that they gave me the letters to persecute Christians in Damascus. They know what I'm saying is true. They know that I persecuted the way. There's no denying it. There's no getting away from it. I did this. This is who I am. This is what I have done. And so now it's tremendously significant here that Paul is using personal testimony in his preaching. So let's get back to it here. And verse 11 through 21. Paul continues to speak. He says, because I was not able to see because of the glory of that light, I came into Damascus led by the hand of those who were with me. And Ananias, a pious man as regards the law, a man to whose character all the Jews who lived there bear witness, came to me and stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight again. And I, in that same hour, recovered my sight and looked up at him. And he said, the God of our fathers has chosen you to know his will, to see the just one, and to hear the voice of his mouth, because you will be a witness for him to all men of all things you have seen and heard. And now, why do you wait? Rise up, be baptized, and wash away your sins, calling upon his name. When I had returned to Jerusalem, and when I was praying in the temple, it so happened that I was in a trance, and I heard him saying to me, him meaning God, hurry, depart speedily from Jerusalem, because they will not receive your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, they know that it was I who throughout the synagogues used to throw into prison and scourge those who believe in you. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was shed, I too was standing by, and I was agreeing to it all. And I was guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. And he said to me, get on your way, for I will send you far off to the Gentiles. So, again, Paul is stressing his own personal identity with the crowd at this particular time. He talks about, when he reached Damascus, Ananias, not just Ananias as a Christian, Ananias as a Jew, and a faithful Jew, and all the Jews there will bear testimony to this. Paul is stressing the fact that I'm no renegade, guys. I have remained, and I am to this point in time, I have been a good and faithful Jew. I just happen to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And so he's giving his testimony here ongoing. And so Paul is saying here, I have this gift, and I am trying to share this gift to you, but you will not take it. So that's why I went and offered it to the Gentiles. It's not me who should be hated and you should be trying to destroy. God is the one who has called me and who has gifted me to do this. So this is not only a summary of the life of Paul, but it's also a summary of the Christian life. There are 3 items here that you need to take note of. First of all, Paul talks about knowing the will of God. It's the first aim of a Christian person to know God's will and to obey that will and to obey it completely. The second is to see the just one. The aim of the Christian life is to walk daily in the light of Christ, to be made into the image of Jesus Christ more and more every day, to know him and to be like him. I would see Jesus. That should be the prayer of each and every one of us. And the third thing here, Paul says, is to hear the voice of his mouth. It is said that great preaching is simply hearing the voice of Christ. The Christian is ever to listen for and to the voice of God above all the other voices of the world, everything else that's going on around us. And we are to go and to do what God is calling us to, wherever God's calling us to go, and do whatever God is telling us to do. I know, not always the easiest of things, but that's what Paul is doing here, and that's what he's also calling us to do. And at this point, his message kind of gets interrupted, and we'll get into that next time here. We begin to see that the people that were opposed to Paul were extremely opposed to Paul. But we'll get into that next time. So, hey, thanks for stopping by today and gathering around the kitchen table for Bible study. Have a good day. Hope the Lord blesses you real good.